from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello again to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. I'm very pleased today to have with me Steve Anderson, who's joining me live from Tennessee, US. Steve, I know we have a lot to discuss together. You are a bestseller author. You are best known about, the Bezos method of risk taking. I'm very excited to have this discussion with you. At the beginning, if you can just introduce yourself and what you are up to.
Sure, I'd be glad to. And Mehmet, thank you for having me. I always enjoy conversations around risk and growth and all those kinds of things. So look forward to us talking. Background is insurance for me. From almost my entire career, early on, worked in 2 independent insurance agencies, so selling insurance to both individuals and businesses. And then got a real interest in technology in addition to the insurance stuff. And so 25 years ago, I actually started my own company doing research, writing, speaking, and consulting around the use of technology by the insurance industry, and more specifically, the independent agents that sell the insurance to the consumer, again, whether they're individuals or businesses. And, it was that mindset, right, that started me really thinking about the intersection or how technology affects businesses, right? We all know it's growing rapidly, continues to do that. Doesn't certainly appear to be slowing down. And I started asking the question, is the biggest risk businesses face actually not taking enough risk? And so that was the germ of the idea, which led me to research and the book, the Bezos Letters, 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon.
That's really great to hear, Steve, from you. And let's start with this. Risk in businesses, right? So, and you come from an insurance background. How, you came up with, this, I would say, relation between risk and Jeff Bezos. Can you explain this? What's the relation?
So when I started researching this idea of the really connection between risk-taking and growth, and I will say, a lot of times entrepreneurs are thought of as risk takers, and that might be true, but also a lot of those entrepreneurs actually don't survive a year or 5 years, et cetera. They aren't able to sustain that growth. And I came across, I started looking at different companies, and those companies that were once very successful and are no longer here. Certainly BlackBerry's here in the US, Blockbuster, lots of different examples, very successful, but didn't sustain that success. Came across Amazon as an example that a company very successful and has been able to continue to sustain that success. Found the shareholder letters that Jeff Bezos started writing when they became a public company in 1997. And the book actually goes through the 2018 letter. And I became fascinated with those letters. Typically shareholder letters are boring. They tout the company, tout, great things the company's doing, their growth plans moving forward. Bezos certainly did some of that, but he more focused on what is it that's going to make Amazon successful in the next couple of years, but also in decades in the future. And so that's what intrigued me. And I get convinced, aware, I realized that actually Jeff Bezos is the master of risk-taking because he takes risks strategically to grow. And there are a couple of principles around that grew out of kind of that realization. And as I read through the letters, I literally sat down over a few days, read through every letter in sequential order. And I realized there were threads that went through those letters. And one of those was the importance of experimentation. And he talks about that a lot. And he says experimentation is the key to solving customer problems and the key then to growing as a company. But here's the problem. And this is where a lot of companies don't embrace experimentation because experiments lead to failure. In fact, most of the time, experiments fail. And what Bezos says is, if you know it's going to work, it's not an experiment. So you have to embrace failure as part of the process of inventing on behalf of the customer. So my first principle, and I grouped those 14 principles into 4 different cycles: test, build, accelerate, and scale. Well, the first principle in the test cycle is encourage successful failure. So in fact, Bezos says that Amazon is the best place in the world for an employee to fail because they don't punish failure, they learn from failure. And that's counterintuitive to most businesses, how they think and how they either grow or don't grow.
Yeah. That's really, I think we are lucky because you have spotted this, Steve. And you mentioned something, usually in startups, people have assumptions and they are afraid of even trying and to change. And when it comes to large corporate, it's a no-go all the way. So you mentioned like you have 14 principles, you collected them into 14 principles. Like just on a high level, how do you think businesses can incorporate these principles into their own strategies? And what do you think the benefit that they will get if they try to apply these 14 principles?
I would say one way I phrase that, I guess, is that, would you like Jeff Bezos as your business coach? And most of the time people say, absolutely. Well, that was one of the things that kind of grew out of my research is these are things that Bezos thought were important. So like encourage successful failure. And many companies, especially as they start getting some success, they actually tend to get more protective and less willing to take risks, right? Because now they have to protect their success. So they can't take a risk. Well, Amazon doesn't think that way. And Bezos certainly doesn't lead Amazon that way, meaning you've got to try new ideas. And I can give you multiple examples of that.
Sure.
But, let me take the marketplace. So Amazon Marketplace, opening their platform to third-party sellers, not associated with Amazon at all, independent businesses, allowing them to have space on Amazon's product page. They spent billions of dollars creating the clients to come to those pages, and they allowed third parties to come in. Now they take a fee for that, but that's really crazy. And they tried 2 different iterations of that before they found what they considered to be a success. The first was Amazon auctions. So they actually tried to compete with eBay. And failure. Didn't work. Nobody came. And part of it was customers didn't come to Amazon to bid on something. They came to buy something. Whereas at eBay, They were trained, oh, I bet on it, might get it or I might not get it. So there was a disconnect there with customers coming to Amazon. And then the second was called Z, letter Z, shops. So they shut down the Amazon auctions. They tested a second iteration called Z Shop. The problem there was the customer experience was bad. You actually, as a customer of Amazon, had to log into a separate place on the website to see those third-party sellers. Well, again, people didn't want to do that. There was too much friction. They finally came around to what now we know as Marketplace, opening it up. And here's what Bezos said. If one of those third-party sellers has a product that we don't have in stock, that's better for the customer. If they have a price that's lower than what we have, that's better for the customer. And if it's better for the customer, it will ultimately be better for Amazon and our shareholders. And again, his senior leadership team thought he was crazy to do this. Very counterintuitive. Who in their right mind allows their competitors to come in and sell on their website? But he proved out the theory, and now Marketplace represents 60+% of the sales on Amazon, and they make fees on it. I mean, they've continued to build and develop that, and customers know they can go there. So more and more customers continue to come to the website. So that's an example of successful failures, right? 2 iterations didn't work. They could have shut it down going, no, we're not going to do this. They kept trying to understand what is the right combination to help customers and help Amazon at the same time. So back to your question, how can that help other businesses? What are you protecting in your business as you're growing, either a new startup or someone who's been around a while, that you need to be experimenting with what's next? And I will also say that culture in your business has a great impact on how employees respond. So here's what I believe. Employees are not afraid of failing. They actually understand, maybe better than most, that that's part of the process, but they are afraid of the consequences of failure. So is my career going to be damaged? Am I going to get fired because of this mistake or this failure? And then employees learn pretty quickly not to come up with new ideas, even though they might be crazy. And at Amazon, they come up with crazy ideas a lot. And it's because sometimes those crazy ideas actually work.
Now, do you think that this is related to culture, Steve? Like when, I like to read stories about startups and, like already established companies like Amazon, they have this mentality of, always be in the pursuit to find new ideas. I know that Google is one of the companies that also that sometimes they allow, they have the famous because they follow the OKR thing and they are allowed to have stretched goals. How important is culture in encouraging, this mentality to flourish within, whether it's a startup or an established business?
I think it's key because without the culture, employees don't trust that what you say is actually going to be true. Meaning, I try this experiment, it fails. Okay, what's going to happen? And I want to make sure people understand Amazon has an intolerance for incompetence. So this is not just, so what? Let's see what happens. This is very intentional. And they've actually created some processes around how to make those experiments as successful as they possibly can. But culture, I think, is really key. And again, in the scale cycle, one of my principles is maintain your culture, even as you grow. And that becomes really important if you're going to have everybody working together on a common goal. So it is very important.
Yeah. Now, the other question, which is related to this and something that also I know you like to talk about, Steve, sometimes, someone might say the reason these companies are not daring to try something new because, everything is going well. revenues are coming, investors are happy. So now if we do something wrong, maybe the investors will not like it, right? So it might fire back in the market. Now I want you, because I know what will react. I can imagine what your answer would be, but I need this for anyone who is in the venture capitalist side, on the investor side, to listen to this. Why it's important to be customer centric. And actually you talk about, when I was preparing, for the episode, you talk about not only customer centricity, you need to be like addicted to your customers. So how that is important?
So I'm going to go back to the very first letter of 1987. And that letter really has created the foundation for what Bezos thinks and how he thinks and how the company is going to grow. And so there were several different sections he talked about. The first one he started with is what he called customer obsession. And
obsession, yeah.
Yeah, obsession. And that's always intrigued me. Because as you said, every business knows they need to take care of their customer or they won't have anybody to sell to, right? They won't make any money. But when you use the word obsessive or obsession, that's very different from customer service, customer focus, customer journey, which is what most businesses talk about. And in fact, obsession can have negative sides to it, right? If you're obsessed over something, you're over focused, And so the question then becomes, can you be over focused on your customer? And I think that's one of the ideas that Bezos continued to push in his letters and in employees, that we start with the customer and work backwards. And so it's a different take. Now, I will say one of the objections or one of the negative things you hear about Amazon is how they treat employees. And I think more specifically, the fulfillment center employees. Mm-hmm. So I've also asked the question, can customer obsession go too far? Let me explain that. So Amazon has 3 pillars, customer pillars: wide selection, the everything store; low pricing, not the lowest all the time, but you'd know that Amazon's going to have consistently low prices. Third is fast delivery. And that's where Prime comes in, right? 2 days or less, 1 day or less, 1 hour or less. I mean, depending on where you're located, how close you are to a fulfillment center. Well, fast delivery, what does that mean? That means employees in the fulfillment centers where the products are on shelves, that product has to be pulled off the shelf, put in a box, put a label on it, put in a truck, and sent. But if we're going to have 2 days or less delivery, that's got to be done fast. And so there's this push to improve productivity and have employees work fast. So can that be too much? Well, actually, Bezos thought maybe they had gone too far on obsession, because in the last letter as CEO in 2020, he actually added 2 leadership principles to address employees. One was Amazon will be the best place to work in the world. And 2 is Amazon will be the safest place for an employee to work in the world. Now that's 2020, we're 2023. They've already made steps to move toward that. But for Amazon, leadership principles are the guiding principles for every employee. So when those 2 principles elevated to the leadership principles, now the entire company starts focusing on how can we do this better? And they've already started. I mean, for example, one thing they were able to do pretty early and quickly, because they have data, because they track employees, they actually know when an employee is working too long in a particular position, and they move them to another position to reduce the repetitive injury, the carpal tunnel syndrome. And again, coming out of the insurance industry, workers' compensation, these are all big issues. Now, are they perfect yet? No, but they're moving toward that. So even learning as a company, as they continue to grow, how to do it better, I think is part of the culture and part of the principles that they follow as a company.
Yeah, and I think like there is nothing I believe like can be 100% perfect, right? Like there should be some frictions down the road, and I mean the importance is to figure out these frictions and try to solve them as soon as possible.
Exactly.
One of the things you talk about in the book, Steve, is something you call it the flywheel. Can you explain this a little bit more to us?
I can. So again, the principle is understand your flywheel. It's in the second cycle called build. And the background to that is Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great, published in October of 2001. And one of the chapters, chapter 8, was called The Flywheel and the Doom Loop. Jim Collins was invited by Bezos to a all-hands offsite meeting. So their senior leadership team, not all hands, senior leadership team offsite. They spent an entire day just talking about the flywheel. And actually, they sketched out that day what they considered to be Amazon's flywheel. And Bezos thought it was so critical to the company that he didn't want anybody to talk about it at all. In fact, it was 5, 6, 7 years before they acknowledged their flywheel. But here's the idea. So a flywheel, kind of mechanically, is usually a very big wheel that takes a lot of energy to get moving, really hard to get going. But once you get it going and once you continue to have inputs, then that flywheel just starts. It doesn't move on its own because you've got to continue to put energy into it, but it takes less energy to move it. And so for Amazon, the central part of the flywheel, the goal was growth. That's their focus, especially early on, because he felt like the internet would benefit from kind of the land rush. The sooner Amazon grew, the more they'd be able to take advantage. Again, part of that flywheel. But in order to do that, the inputs were getting more customers. Well, Amazon did very little advertising in the beginning. What they focused on was how easy the website was to use and to buy stuff. And so the easier the website was to use and the quicker people could buy stuff, the more people talked about, hey, you ought to go to Amazon for that because they can get it to you in a few days and they have everything. So that was one of the inputs. More customers coming to the website allowed them to negotiate lower prices with manufacturers because they had greater volume. So that's another input of the flywheel. And then they started adding the marketplace, which gave them another avenue to customers. And again, more negotiation with manufacturers. And again, as you can kind of see those inputs, that flywheel keeps moving. And in fact, you can look at what Amazon does today in that idea of the flywheel and see it in practice as they either move into different areas and create entirely new businesses. They look at what are the leverage points that they can benefit from and use to accelerate their growth. So again, back to your earlier question, how can a business use that? What's your flywheel? And likely people have the book on their bookshelf, right? A very popular book. Good to Great, Collins. Just go to chapter 8 and read his description of the flywheel and the doom loop. Doom loop is what happens when you don't have a flywheel. So that's, to me, very practical things that a business owner can do to start thinking about what's our flywheel? How do we continue to grow as a business?
Yeah. I advise everyone to read this book. It's a great book. It's actually every single, business startup book refer actually to Good to Great by John Collins. Like it's one of the best. I think it's an iconic book. Yep. Actually want to ask you, so Amazon, they're not only famous for the e-commerce business. So they have managed actually to disrupt multiple industries at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think like are the key factors behind this capacity of being able to disrupt this number of industries at the same time?
I have a couple thoughts. I think one is, I don't think Amazon ever, I won't say ever, I think seldom does Amazon look at an industry going, we're going to disrupt that industry. I think what they do think is, what are the opportunities that aren't being utilized within different industries? So let's go back to early 2000s, and Amazon had a real problem with their internal development, meaning they had all kinds of different teams working on different projects. Teams were creating the same stuff that they needed for their own. And actually, Bezos, again, sent out an email saying, we're not doing this anymore. We're going to create, and it was influenced by a book whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, but it talked about containers. And so really the core idea for AWS came out of Amazon's need. We're going to have a team create the core stuff that every developer in a team needs for their own particular product or project. You don't have to create it. Databases and I can't name them all. You could probably name them more than I could. But all of those foundational things they created. Open APIs very early, right? So that they could communicate machine to machine. They didn't have to rely on somebody in a team to open it up for them. And then somebody realized, I actually think it was Andy Jassy, realized that, hey, wait, there are a lot of developers that have this same problem. Maybe they would be interested in buying computer time. Nobody knew you could buy computer time. I mean, that's not true. There were some timeshare computer stuff early on, but not at the scale and not at the low cost that Amazon was able to do. So they didn't set out to disrupt the client server industry. They saw an opportunity to help lower the cost, for their customers and other developers, and build out that infrastructure. And actually Bezos addressed AWS because he says that for Amazon, AWS was a business miracle because they had a 7-year head start before Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, Google, right? Any of the others realized that cloud computing would become a thing. And obviously it has. And Amazon, while all of those are chipping away market share, they still have a large market share of the cloud computing. And then all that infrastructure that they built helped continue to lower costs, et cetera. So did they set out to disrupt that? No, but they saw an opportunity where they could add value. And one of the phrases Bezos uses that I really like is, how can we do something with meaningful differentiation? Saying, okay, let's not do the same old thing. How can we have meaningful differentiation in what we do? And the Kindle is an example of that. The physical stores, and again, I would get back to my experimenting. They've been experimenting with physical stores and they shut down a lot of them, right? Everybody looks at that as a failure, but yes, it is. And that's part of the process that Amazon does. And I don't see many other companies doing those kinds of things.
Yeah. Just a story for whoever is watching or listening to this episode. I remember 2 years before AWS came out, I was thinking like there should be something that allows me to rent a computer for some time. And actually the use case at that time was like being a student. I wish that I can, run for a couple of times and it's available somewhere. I didn't even that they would call it the cloud that time. Right. So yeah, renting someone else's machine, right? So this is what all cloud computing is all about. Now, I wonder, Steve, because you have almost read all the letters of Jeff Bezos and, you followed Amazon. Do you think that things After, he's still involved, but I mean, they have another CEO there. Do you think that this culture would remain with Amazon on the long term? And the reason I'm asking this, because there is, especially in the startup world, like if the CEO or the founder, let's say, if the founder leaves the company, the company would not be as it was before. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree. So I have a couple thoughts. I think that's absolutely possible. And to me, it's interesting. A couple things. One is that Bezos decided now, or at least a couple years ago, to make this transition. And as you said, he's still involved, but I think peripherally now, certainly as executive chairman, he's on the board, he knows what's going on. I think the other thing is, in terms of will that culture be maintained? Andy Jassy actually grew AWS. He was CEO there for 20 years, I believe, and that may not, but a long time. Let's say that. And before that, he was Jeff Bezos' technical assistant. So that term or that title is someone who shadows Jeff Bezos, literally goes everywhere he goes to, takes notes in meetings, spends, and I assume in many cases, 24 hours, with him. So he got a deep education and, might I say, indoctrination into Bezos, how he thinks, the culture, how to keep that going. I have those same questions. He's taken over now. He's written, I think, 2 letters, 21 and 22. Still interesting letters, a different tone, because it's not Jeff Bezos, it's Andy Jassy. That's expected. And I wonder, actually, I have a good friend here, and a phrase he's used that I think is important. A founder, executive, CEO doesn't have ultimate success without succession. So ultimately for Jeff Bezos, will he be remembered for how he transitioned away from founder and allowed somebody else to come in? And certainly there's lots being written now and talked about Amazon, the layoffs, they're closing things down. They're kind of focused more on expenses. And I think, maybe one of the mistakes Bezos made during the pandemic was growing too fast. But they had all of these customers who all of a sudden relied on Amazon to get them stuff. So scaling that up, they were able to do amazing fast. So that's pretty interesting. But did they go too far? And now they're kind of scaling back down to where they need to be. So that certainly is something I'm watching.
Yeah. So to be fair, it's not only Amazon. It was not only Jeff Bezos, like every single company around the world, and not only in the US, by the way.
Yes.
They had to hire more people. They
hired, they scaled up, because the demand was there. And now things are, I never say they're getting back to normal, because I don't even know what normal is anymore, but they are not, that growth curve is not continuing. And so they've got to, as a business, make wise decisions about how to correct, some of the
right. One of the things, just on a side note here, and this is my own opinion as well, someone might agree with me, someone might not agree with me. We need to find, and especially in the tech world, because I cover more about tech companies, we need to find a way that we should not be reactive. We should be proactive. We should always have. And this is one of the things, like Steve, because you're coming from an insurance background, and the risk. We talk about risks. Of course, we need to be ready to take risks, but we need also to calculate these risks. I know that a lot of my friends around the globe who were let off, and the reason, very simple, because there was no planning at the time of these hires. Yeah, we just need to fulfill as much as possible, and everyone thought that this will last forever, which is not the case. Like everything is a
it's seldom the case, it seems like to me, right? And so could they have anticipated that it would be a peak, and then how to adjust that? I don't know. It's easy to be a
I don't know.
morning quarterback. So
Yeah, for me, like I'm maybe again, not everyone would agree with me, Steve, but for me, like economies, like everything in life, it's cycles, right? So everything has up and downs. Like, one day you are up. This very rarely you see, and even these companies that they have this exponential growth that they talk about, you would see like at some stage they will have this, they will slop down a little bit and then they will go up again. So this is what they should be ready to have, I would say. Now, like based on, like all what we discussed today, if you want to give an advice for someone who's today sitting and thinking of starting his own company, like if you want to give him out, as they say, words of wisdom, what do you advise them to do?
There are so many things going through my head right now. So let me try and pick, and I'll pick a couple. So one is, and we've talked a lot about this, don't be afraid of experiment.
Yes.
Understand that if you experiment, you're going to fail. And as you build a company as a startup, start working early to build that idea culture into your company. I mean, I started a new company a year and a half ago. A handful of employees, but we continue to talk about these kinds of things. Let's try it. Let's experiment. Let's, how can we protect the downside? You have to take smart risks. You have to understand, is it a big risk or is it a small risk? I think the other thing, and again, this is my last principle, number 14, and it's in the scale. As you continue to grow, believe it's always day one. And what that means is it's a mindset that as you grow, don't forget those first days. So even a year, 2 years, 5 years, into your company, do you open the door of your business and walk in thinking, how excited I am because this is day one. And that comes from Jeff Bezos. In the 1997 letter, he said, this is day one for the internet. Remember, 1997, he started in 1994, 95. Internet, nobody had any idea what it could become. But this is day one for the internet and for Amazon.com if we execute well. And he continued that thread through every single letter he wrote. The closing paragraph of the letter always had something referencing day one. It's still day one. It continues to be day one. Even in the 2019 letter, which I call the pandemic letter, right? Lots of problems, lots of growth. He said, even with the challenges we face, it's still day one. And do I have time for a quick story?
Sure, please.
Okay. So Bezos was at an all hands meeting in Seattle in front of a couple thousand Amazon employees, a regular occurrence. Talked about where the company is. At the end, he would always open it up for questions. And these were submitted by employees beforehand. So he had note cards with questions on. And he looked down at his note card and said, question. And he kind of smiled a little bit and chuckled and said, I think I know the answer to this question. And the question was, Jeff, what does day two look like? And he went on to say, day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that's why it's always day one. Now, let me reference back to some of those companies I alluded to, once very successful, but are no longer here. And he later wrote about it, and he said, that decline could take 20 years or longer. It doesn't necessarily have to fail us. But once you start down on a day two mindset, really hard to reverse that. And ultimately, the business fails and goes out of business. And again, lots of different examples that we could talk about of that. But that's that day one as a mindset, I think is important for the owner and important in your culture to build that into people, that it's still exciting. And if it's not, what can we do to create that excitement? And that may go back to experimenting and trying something new. And that's how, honestly, 14 is a lot of principles, And they each stand on their own and they each interact with each other. So it's not just one, but it's how these can combine together.
Absolutely. Like, Steve, I think this mentality of always being on day one, I'm trying to one day also having my own startup. And this is always what I tell myself. And sometimes people tell me, why you always have these ideas in your mind? Because I tell them the day I just keep thinking about, the same thing and I get like stubborn on them, I think, I would not be creative. I don't feel myself doing something new, because you need always to be thinking of, okay, maybe how I can increase my revenue, how I can make my customers more happy. And the way to do this, you don't just bring a book and you say, hey, let's look at what this book says and we follow it. Like, no, you need to go outside of the book and try something new, something maybe some never tried before, right? So I really like this. Just out of curiosity, Steve, I know like you are, kind of specialized in Bezos and Amazon, but who else from, the startups like you watched maybe or you followed, do you think they were also having something similar?
Well, let me answer it this way. I often get asked, what's my next book? Right?
Yes.
So Elon Musk or maybe Microsoft. I would say, remember I said it's hard once you go down to it's hard to change. Microsoft is an example of a company that actually has changed.
Yes.
Right? And that's to me pretty fascinating to watch as a company how they were pretty much written off, right? Still big, but nobody really paid attention to it. And now look at them, right? Heading the generative AI and opened all their apps to Apple and mobile, and all kinds of things. And now Teams, I mean, it's hard, at least in my world, it's hard not to be in the Microsoft world, right? For businesses, et cetera. So I think those are some, and they're, because in the insurance space, let me answer it also this way. One of the things I do is follow the InsurTech, right? Insurance technology startups, literally globally. And so there are all kinds of interesting things happen in a very staid, conservative, risk-averse industry that are trying to get people in my industry to actually think differently and experiment, which again, for them, is like anathema. We can't do that. But so that's a roundabout answer to, there are a lot of things that I look at and watch and pay attention to.
Great. Like, I think we need to do a separate episode maybe about InsurTech.
We could.
Yeah. Because this is, I shared a couple of times, about, what's happening in that space. But of course, we need to get the people who are subject matter experts, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Great insight, Steve, today. I have a very famous question that I ask at the end. And the question is, which question you wish that I asked you and how you would answer it?
All right. I'm going to pick another principle because I do think.
Sure.
I like it. I'll say it that way. So in the accelerate cycle, there's a principle called generate high velocity decisions. And as a company grows and has success, they tend to get more bureaucratic. They tend to get more layers of, management. I'll say it that way. And more layers of management only serve to slow down growth. So what Bezos says is decision-making at a company is really important. And he identifies two different types of decision, type 1, type 2. Not very creative, but that's what he said. Type 1 decisions are huge, bet the farm, really big decisions. And he says those decisions should be made slowly with as much information as you possibly can gather with a gut intuition, because they're hard to reverse. However, he says, most decisions in a business are type 2 decisions. Type 2 decisions are smaller, less consequential, important, yes, but less consequential and easier to change.
Yeah.
So he talks about walking through a door in a type 2 decision, looking around, not liking what you see, and either reversing the decision, going back through the door, or pivoting to a different direction. And he said those decisions should be made in small, highly qualified groups. And so for Amazon, those groups are called 2 pizza teams. A team should only be as big as what 2 large pizzas can feed them. That typically is probably 10 to 12 people. But you give them the authority, and if you hired them and they were high caliber people, why aren't you letting them do what you hired them to do? Make decisions. Now, again, that goes back to, are they going to make a wrong decision? Absolutely. But remember, we encourage successful failure. But that decision can be changed quickly, and it doesn't impact the overall health and growth of the company. So I think, again, this is just another example of these principles interacting with one another. And I would say, again, start with 1 or 2 that resonate with you right. Don't try and do them all. You're not going to do that. And I understand if you don't want to be another Amazon. In fact, you're unlikely to be. That doesn't mean you can't learn from how they grew to make your business more successful.
That's very, actually it was on my mind. I don't know why I skipped, but it's good like you mentioned, Steve, because the way I wanted to ask you this question was the following. Why companies, when they grow, and sorry for the term, they become like dinosaurs, right? Like they cannot move anymore, like same when they were like smaller. Like if you want just, I hope no one will get offended by what I'm saying, just because I want to agree with you, Steve. You reach a place when the company becomes big. You just need, a piece of paper mentioning that, okay, I certify that this guy, he works with me, or I certify that this reseller is a reseller with me. And you see, they have put these processes that it needs to be signed by 10 people just for something that maybe if you give the authority to one guy to issue this, they can save time, they can save money, they can save resources, they can save many things. So,
and you're faster. I mean, that back to my comment, all of that bureaucracy does is slow down the business,
100%.
which slows down growth. And I think companies, when they have something that's successful, they're afraid to do something different because they're already successful. They have to protect their success, not find out what's next. And maybe it won't. And that just gets into the culture and is that day 2 process.
Yeah. So my advice from me, if you are an entrepreneur, especially in tech, because we focus on tech, don't aim to become, I don't want to name any big company name, but don't aim to become, I want to be this big company, because if you put it this way, you would start to focus on things that you should not be focusing on. As Steve mentioned, you need to focus on innovation, how to serve the customers better. And I think this is the secret of Amazon, if we can call it a secret, actually, because
I call it, hidden in plain sight. So
Exactly. So being able to be agile, innovative, and customer obsessed, as you mentioned, Steve.
Yep.
Steve, really, I enjoyed, the discussion today with you. It's very informative. I'm sure that we're going to have another episode maybe later regarding the InsurTech. Thank you very much for your time today. And as usual, I end my episodes by asking whoever is watching or listening to us, if you have any feedback, any questions. By the way, I highly advise that you get the book that Steve wrote. I would put the link in the episode, the description. And if you have any questions, any feedback, please feel free to reach out to me by email, LinkedIn, or Twitter. And also, if you are interested to be a guest with me, like same as Steve today, don't hesitate to reach out and we can arrange for this. And, as usual, until we meet in the next episode, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.